On January 12, 1948, a wrecking ball sliced through the chilly air along Riverside Drive in Manhattan, smashing into limestone. The structure in its sights was the Schwab Mansion, a lavish 75-room estate that had cost $7 million to erect 4 decades prior. Charles Schwab's widow had made frantic efforts to offload it, yet no purchaser was willing to cover even the yearly taxes. The grand residence, which demanded 4 years and 2,000 laborers to assemble, was reduced to rubble in just 6 weeks. Its marble hearths were carted off to a hotel in Florida. The bronze elements were smelted down for scrap metal. The intricate oak paneling fetched prices by weight. This narrative explores how America methodically razed hundreds of its most impressive architectural marvels, demolishing enduring palaces because the wealth behind them proved insufficient to maintain them. The demolition wave originated on Fifth Avenue, then rippled outward like an epidemic. By 1900, this iconic Manhattan thoroughfare had transformed into a ravine lined with opulent private estates, running from Washington Square up to Central Park's boundary. The Vanderbilts commanded no fewer than 7 such dwellings along that stretch alone. The Astors dominated a full block. The Whitneys, Huntingtons, Fricks, and Goulds each laid claim with their stone and marble fortresses. European tourists gawked at the sheer density of riches on display. Nothing in London or Paris came close. They dubbed it Millionaire's Row. Yet in a mere 60 years, nearly all those grand abodes vanished. The statistics remain jaw-dropping today. Back in 1900, the section of Fifth Avenue from 50th to 90th Streets housed over 40 significant private homes, each valued at millions. Come 1960, scarcely 5 were left intact. The others had been leveled, their sites cleared for high-rises, office skyscrapers, and retail complexes. The William K. Vanderbilt residence at 660 Fifth Avenue, finished in 1882 for $3 million, met its end in 1926. The Senator William Clark Estate at 962 Fifth Avenue, with its 121 rooms, tumbled in 1927. The Charles Marcus Mansion followed in 1938. The Schwab Mansion on Riverside Drive, arguably the most splendid private dwelling ever raised in Manhattan, was wiped out in 1948. Every teardown obliterated years of labor and millions in spending within mere weeks. Newport endured a similar tragedy, though on a tighter scale of space and time. The resort enclave, once dotted with over 80 grand summer houses, saw more than half disappear from 1920 to 1970. Beacon Hill House went under in 1939. The Elms fell in 1938. Land's End, the Gothic revival gem, where Edith Wharton once stayed as a visitor, was destroyed in 1963. The Drexel Cottage evaporated. The Gamble House faded away. One estate after another vanished from the terrain, supplanted by housing tracts, empty parcels, or projects utterly disconnected from their predecessors. Demolition teams swept along Bellevue Avenue with brisk professionalism, taking apart in days what artisans had refined over years. Chicago's Prairie Avenue echoes the tale, albeit with distinct figures and design influences. In 1880, this South Side segment sheltered more tycoons per acre than anywhere else in the nation. The Pullmans resided in a colossal stone pile there. The Armours, those meat-packing magnates, and the Fields did likewise. The Kimballs raised an ornate chateau. Though smaller than Newport's retreats, these homes brimmed with lavish European decor inside and were run by squads of household staff. By 1950, Prairie Avenue had devolved into a derelict industrial zone, hemmed in by railroad depots. The Glessner House endured solely because its robust Romanesque stonework made profitable wrecking too costly. The Kimball Mansion morphed into a storage facility before its ultimate collapse. The majority simply evaporated without fanfare. Philadelphia saw the elegant homes of Rittenhouse Square succumb one by one across those same eras. Boston witnessed Beacon Hill's biggest mansions carved into flats or raised for public edifices. San Francisco's Nob Hill estates perished in the 1906 earthquake and blaze. Their original owners opted against restoring them as family seats. The Hopkins Mansion turned into the Mark Hopkins Hotel. The Stanford Mansion was gifted to serve as a school. The Crocker Mansion was left unrestored entirely. Nationwide, from one shore to the other, this grim cycle played out relentlessly. The finest private homes ever fashioned in the New World met their doom through deliberate erasure within one generation after their erection. The scavenging efforts grew into a full-fledged trade, with experts hired to plunder these estates ahead of the heavy machinery. As the Clark Mansion was dismantled, merchants prowled its halls like excavators at a dig site. Marble fireplaces headed to enthusiasts in Palm Beach. Bronze hardware was inventoried and rendered down for raw materials. The sculpted wood detailing was carefully taken apart piece by piece and dispatched to purchasers nationwide. Certain artifacts found their way into museums, showcasing the exquisite artistry of the Gilded Age. Many more slipped into private holdings, vanishing from public view forever. A large share met their end right there on the property. Deemed too costly to extract with care, or too intricate for prospective purchasers to justify the shipping expenses. The gymnasium gear from the Schwab residence was passed along to a nearby school. Its grand pipe organ found a new home in a church that required one. All the rest turned to debris, carted off to dump sites. The developments that took over these grand estates reveal a shift in societal priorities. The Vanderbilt home on West 57th Street transformed into the Bergdorf Goodman department store, catering to crowds of shoppers each day in a space once occupied by a single affluent clan. The plot of the Astor Mansion helped form the foundation of the Empire State Building. Senator Clark's sprawling 121-room residence gave way to an apartment complex with 39 residences for 39 separate households. Sites that once accommodated solitary opulent families now sheltered multitudes of everyday middle-class dwellers. The sense of exclusivity cherished so deeply by the initial proprietors was systematically wiped away. The pace of these teardowns surged after 1929. The Wall Street collapse didn't merely bankrupt the clans behind these estates. It upended the very financial framework sustaining their upkeep. Prior to the downturn, prosperous lineages viewed these homes as enduring symbols of their legacies. Post-crash, they morphed into burdensome assets, sapping the vitality from vast inheritances. Nobody sought to acquire a 75-room behemoth running $200,000 annually in upkeep. Even those inclined to do so lacked the means. The underlying economics had shifted for good, with no turning back. By 1940, such demolitions were routine enough to scarcely register in the press. Yet another lavish abode, reduced to ruins. Yet another fragment of the nation's built heritage, scrubbed from city skylines. Coverage focused solely on the grandest and best-known examples. The Schwab estate earned headline status, as did the Clark property and the prominent Vanderbilt holdings, while scores of lesser chateaux faded away unnoticed. Devoid of any outcry or attempts at safeguarding, these structures had risen to proclaim their builders' ascent to the pinnacle of U.S. high society. They crumbled because that pinnacle had dissolved as an attainable goal for anyone. One persistent query hung over each such raising. Why were these lineages unable to rescue their own abodes? By conventional metrics, they remained prosperous. The Vanderbilts hadn't slipped into true destitution. The Astors preserved colossal wealth distributed over generations. Descendants of the original estate creators frequently controlled greater raw sums than their forebears ever did. Still, They couldn't sustain even one residence without drastic interventions. They opted for demolition rather than upkeep. They embraced ruin over the weight of ongoing care. A core element in the financial calculus had altered irrevocably. These estates had been erected for an era that evaporated out from under their founders. That stood as the most straightforward explanation possible. When Cornelius Vanderbilt II ordered his Fifth Avenue edifice in the 1880s, federal income taxes were non-existent. Labor for servants came cheap, relative to future eras. Real estate levies amounted to mere slivers of property valuations. The capital needed to erect these monuments appeared synonymous with the resources for their longevity, at least to those inking the building agreements. In truth, they diverged sharply. Construction demanded a finite outlay, no matter its scale. Upkeep called for steady revenue, flowing endlessly across years. This divide between capital and income would doom almost all Gilded Age palaces. To grasp how these wonders ascended so splendidly, only to plummet so swiftly, one must first comprehend their origins. Their architects weren't merely affluent for the period. They ranked as the wealthiest U.S. citizens in history to date, wielding riches that overshadowed prior national benchmarks. Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, Morgan, Frick. These figures embodied wealth hordes comparable to continental monarchies. Yet they confronted a dilemma no mere checkbook could resolve. They had to demonstrate their place in the upper echelons. They sought to affirm their lineage's significance. They required validations not purchasable outright, but forged physically in enduring materials. The Gilded Age ignited amid the Civil War's aftermath and burgeoned into a phenomenon unprecedented in the Republic. From 1865 to 1900, America underwent industrialization at a staggering clip. Rail lines spanned the continent. Ironworks reshaped urban centers. Petroleum processors spawned instant empires. Those titans of industry amassed fortunes that overshadowed even the grandest European nobles. John D. Rockefeller's wealth reached almost $1 billion at its height, back when the nation's entire federal budget stood at just $525 million. Andrew Carnegie offloaded his steel conglomerate for $480 million back in 1901. Cornelius Vanderbilt passed away in 1877 with $100 million to his name, and his son managed to double that sum in under 8 years. These weren't merely wealthy individuals. They surpassed any level of riches seen before in American history. Yet in the rigid social order of the 1870s, such riches counted for little. New York's long-standing clans, the heirs Livingstons and Schuylers, regarded the fresh wealth from industry with outright disdain. Earnings from railroads reeked of soot and smoke. Steel profits bore the odor of foreign-born workers. Oil money came off as outright crass. The entrenched elite had secured their status over centuries via dignified commerce. They had no intention of opening their salons to men whose forebears had tilled the soil. The custodians of this world guarded their lines with iron resolve. Mrs. Carolyn Schermerhorn Astor, wed to the descendant of John Jacob Astor, crowned herself the judge of Manhattan's elite circles. Alongside her consultant Ward Mallister, she drew up a roster of approved lineages, precisely 400, said to match the capacity of her grand ballroom. Those omitted from it ceased to register in polite society. Access to her yearly gala decided one's standing, separating the influential from the irrelevant. Fresh fortunes faced outright bans. The Vanderbilts received no summons, nor did the Rockefellers or Carnegies. Their vaults overflowed beyond Mrs. Astor's reckoning, but it changed nothing. These modern moguls confronted a stark impasse. They had mastered every financial hurdle the U.S. could muster, laying tracks across vast lands, forging steel dominions and oil behemoths, dominating commerce and dismantling rivals with cold efficiency. Still, they couldn't purchase entry beyond Mrs. Heirs' reception hall. Their daughters found no suitable matches among proper stock. Their sons got shut out from elite associations. Despite their vast resources, they lingered as pariahs in their hometown. The answer took shape slowly at first, then ignited a fierce rivalry. Denied by heritage, the newcomers would demand recognition via sheer extravagance. They erected residences of such splendor that the upper crust had no choice but to notice. They imported continental sophistication en masse, showcasing elegance that outshone the old guard's own. In stone and sculpted grandeur, they established an unassailable presence. Alva Erskine Smith grasped this approach more keenly than most. She wed William Kissam Vanderbilt in 1875, linking her fate to America's premier rail dynasty. Yet the Vanderbilt legacy still bore the shadow of old Cornelius, the Commodore, infamous for his coarse language, crude habits, and ruthless dealings in building his empire. Alva aimed to rewrite that image for good. By 1879, she engaged Richard Morris Hunt to craft a residence at 1660 Avenue. Hunt, trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, knew precisely how nobility proclaimed its stature via buildings. What emerged was a slice of French Renaissance splendor relocated to the heart of Manhattan, boasting a limestone exterior and intricate ornamental work. Construction ran $3 million, a price justified as a weapon in the social fray. The home debuted via a masked gala in March 1883, drawing 1,200 revelers. Just the adornments ran $155,000. Alva appeared as a princess from Venice, while her sister-in-law donned a dress aglow with actual electric bulbs, fueled by concealed power sources. The festivities stretched till 6 a.m. Mrs. Astor made an appearance. The very goal. Alva had cleverly compelled the traditionalists to validate her by staging an affair no one could skip that winter. This palace had pried ajar the barrier that cash by itself failed to shift. Other upstart dynasties quickly took the hint. If a single estate could pierce the barriers, what might a flurry of them achieve? The wave of construction surged forward without delay. William K. Vanderbilt's sibling, Cornelius II, ordered a grander estate at Fern West 57th Street. The heirs countered by enlarging their holdings. The Whitneys added estates, the Huntingtons followed suit, the Goulds joined in. Rivalries spurred ever bigger projects and opulent blueprints, with expenses climbing and details growing ever more lavish year by year. Newport turned into the seaside stage for this clash of structures. The Rhode Island haven had drawn the fashionable set prior to the Civil War, but these rising fortunes reshaped it utterly. They snapped up seaside parcels along Bellevue Avenue and Ochre Point, raising seasonal villas that eclipsed the year-round homes of Europe's lords. In 1892, William K. Vanderbilt shelled out $11 million for Marble House. 5 years later, his brother Cornelius invested $7 million in the Breakers. Hermann Ulrichs spent $2.5 million on Rosecliff, while Frederick Vanderbilt exceeded $1 million on Rough Point. These estates went far beyond typical dwellings. They served as bastions in a fierce battle of society, designed to assert superiority via sheer scale and intimidation. The guiding principle behind such builds was bold and straightforward. Riches demanded to be flaunted. Restraint belonged to those lacking the means for extravagance. Comfort or aesthetics might emerge as byproducts, but the true aim was demonstrating the ability to outspend rivals on a residence used just 8 weeks annually. The greater the extravagance's futility, the stronger the message. Erecting a practical home was within anyone's reach. Crafting tributes to one's own extravagance required genuine fortune. Yet, this mindset yielded unforeseen repercussions. These edifices demanded fortunes matching their creators to sustain. A 70-room chateau required 50 staff members. A marble exterior called for endless upkeep. Complex engineering setups needed expert technicians. Yearly expenses could equal the cost of a standard grand estate. Still, the Vanderbilts, Astors, and Whitneys focused not on upkeep, but on gaining edges in rivalry. They waged a campaign, and campaigns demand steep prices. The influx of European elements intensified the rivalry even more. Alva Vanderbilt kicked it off by engaging a Paris-trained designer. Competitors escalated. They acquired whole chambers from French chateaux and transported them overseas. They snapped up cathedral tapestries and aristocratic artworks. They employed Parisian artisans to craft interiors in France, only to dismantle and reassemble them in Newport. William Randolph Hearst would eventually devote years to acquiring European castles bit by bit. The Gilded Age clans set the pattern. U.S. prosperity could snap up Old World heritage en masse. Weddings mirrored this acquisitive strategy. Lacking noble lineage by birth, one could acquire it via wedlock. American heiresses sailed eastward hunting for peers with titles. In 1895, Consuelo Vanderbilt wed the Duke of Marlborough, her dowry comprising $2.5 million in railroad shares and $100,000 yearly allowance. The Duke gained funds to revive Blenheim Palace. The Vanderbilts secured a duchess among their ranks. Dozens of such deals proliferated. Yankee wealth purchased British peerages, French manor houses, Italian villas. The emerging elite assembled itself incrementally. By 1900, victory in the social fray was all but sealed. Mrs. Astor's exclusive roster now embraced the Vanderbilts and fellow newcomers. Lines between established and fresh wealth faded into obscurity. The palatial homes lining Fifth Avenue and Bellevue Avenue epitomized the zenith of U.S. opulence and refinement. No European counterpart rivaled their clustered splendor. Their creators had attained all their goals. They validated their preeminence in the sole dialect U.S. high society heeded: lavish, irrefutable ostentation. But their foundations rested on foundations already eroding. Washington would soon wield unprecedented authority. The 16th Amendment ushering in income taxes passed in 1913. Public views glorifying overt riches began to wane. Household staff in these grand homes started forming labor groups. Seemingly boundless estates faced division among successors who would fragment them more. The architects of these legacies envisioned enduring lineages. In truth, they etched their own fate into permanence via masonry. No clan outbuilt the Vanderbilts. With deeper pockets and sharper insecurities, they led the charge. The Commodore, original Cornelius, perished in 1877, bequeathing $100 million, alongside a legacy of vulgarity that chagrined his progeny. Son, William Henry, doubled the sum, yet failed to erase the taint of upstart roots. Grandchildren claimed the wealth and the stigma. They addressed it via building feats unseen in America. Cornelius Vanderbilt II shouldered the mantle as the dutiful successor. Upon William Henry's death in 1885, he claimed the biggest slice, around $70 million, plus oversight of the New York Central Railroad. His junior siblings got lesser allotments and lighter duties. Cornelius bore the dynasty's full gravity. He tackled it with steely resolve. Associates noted he rarely appeared content. Palace building felt like obligation, not joy. His home at 1 West 57th Street evolved into Manhattan's grandest private abode ever. The initial edifice by George Post proved inadequate. Through the 1890s, Cornelius enlisted Richard Morris Hunt for successive enlargements. The ultimate iteration featured more than 130 rooms sprawling over a full city block. Its grand hall soared upward for 3 levels. The gallery showcased artwork valued in the millions. Behind the primary building, service wings housed scores of staff who resided on site. Expenses topped $5 million, excluding decorations and pieces. Cornelius used the place as the central hub for his clan's social endeavors, even as he devoted his days to railway business in the financial district. His sibling, William K. Vanderbilt, pursued a contrasting strategy. Having wed the driven Alva, who grasped how palatial homes could serve as strategic tools, they together ordered the construction of the chateau on 660 Fifth Avenue. This project shattered elite social norms back in 1883. Yet Alva craved further triumphs, targeting Newport next. She turned Marble House into her base for seasonal conquests. Its blueprint echoed the Petit Trianon from Versailles, clad in pristine white marble outside. The inside gleamed with gold accents. Just the Chinese tea house on the property ran $100,000. By 1892, the overall outlay hit $11 million. Once finished, Alva supposedly informed William she was done with their union. Divorce followed in 1895, with her retaining the property. Among the brothers, the youngest, George Washington Vanderbilt, erected the most ambitious project of them all, steering clear of New York or Newport. A bookish and reserved figure, George favored literature over high society pursuits. He opted to raise his legacy amid North Carolina's highlands, distant from the rivalry his siblings chased. Biltmore Estate emerged as America's biggest private dwelling, spanning 178,926 square feet. This French Renaissance castle sat within 125,000 acres of cultivated woodland. Richard Morris Hunt handled the architecture, while Frederick Law Olmsted shaped the surrounding landscape. Work started in 1889 and stretched on for 6 years. Inside lay 250 rooms, including 35 bedrooms, 43 baths, and 65 hearths. George invested roughly $5 million in building it, plus additional fortunes on interiors. The library brimmed with 10,000 books. He sourced tapestries, artworks, and pieces from overseas sales. The outcome dazzled, but proved wildly inefficient. George dedicated much of his existence to rendering the property economically viable. The Astor clan countered the Vanderbilt spree of edifices with their own enlargements. Carolyn Astor's abode on 34th Street had long set the tone for elite circles, yet by the 1890s it felt outdated. Her offspring, John Jacob Astor IV, directed the creation of a paired mansion duo on Fifth Avenue near 65th Street. This setup allowed his mother and his household to dwell in adjoining yet distinct sections. Richard Morris Hunt's blueprint blended French Renaissance flair with cutting-edge innovations. Now Mrs. Astor's ballroom could host well beyond 400 visitors. The intent rang loud. Railroad wealth wouldn't eclipse the Astors. Charles Schwab embodied a fresh breed of constructor altogether. Rising from humble toil in Andrew Carnegie's steel plants via skill and charisma, he ascended to lead U.S. Steel. Upon Carnegie's sale of the conglomerate in 1901, Schwab pocketed millions through shares and rewards. He resolved to craft New York's most opulent private abode yet. Rather than Fifth Avenue, he selected Riverside Drive for a whole block parcel. Architect Maurice Hébert crafted it in French Renaissance fashion. Its proportions awed. Beyond 75 rooms, it included a gym, bowling lane, pool, and dedicated generator. Building expenses surpassed $7 million. Schwab settled there circa 1906, hosting extravagant affairs for years. He allegedly left the entrances unlocked, insisting that curiosity about a steel baron's life merited entry to all. This rivalry spurred increasingly ornate builds. The Whitneys raised homes on Fifth Avenue, then Long Island, and eventually in various spots at once. The Goulds raised estates over multiple states. The Fricks crafted one of the city's premier compact palaces, courtesy of Thomas Hastings, whose lavish insides evolved into the Frick Collection Museum. Henry Clay Frick amassed riches in coke and steel, acting as Carnegie's ally and tough operator amid the savage Homestead Clash of 1892. Though his residence dwarfed the Vanderbilt behemoths in size, it exuded superior elegance. Each space doubled as a showcase for his amassed artworks. The designers catering to these dynasties gained stardom themselves. Richard Morris Hunt ruled the domain until 1895's end. His portfolio encompassed the Vanderbilt Chateau at 665th Avenue, Cornelius II's mansion additions, Marble House, the Breakers, Biltmore Estate, and even the Statue of Liberty's base. His teachings molded U.S. design for generations. Passing away, mid-oversight of the Breakers' finishing touches, his practice passed to his heir. McKim, Mead, and White vied for jobs, shaping the Whitney residence alongside countless other elite homes. Stanford White gained renown comparable to that of his elite patrons, though his private affairs drew scandal and his architectural achievements stood out as remarkable. The era of grand construction persisted unabated during the 1890s and well into the 20th century. Families who amassed vast fortunes felt an irresistible urge to proclaim their status via lavish edifices. Opulent homes proliferated on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, Bellevue Avenue in Newport, the main line outside Philadelphia, and Prairie Avenue in Chicago. In any city boasting millionaires, a neighborhood of mansions soon emerged, where the elite vied with one another through elaborate designs. These residences typically drew from European classical traditions, such as the French chateau, Italian Renaissance, or English Tudor styles. The underlying statement remained uniform. The riches of America could acquire whatever the old world nobility owned, and surpass it in abundance. Yet amid this frenzy of erection, an odd undercurrent emerged. The tycoons behind these grand homes derived little joy from them. Cornelius Vanderbilt II toiled relentlessly and passed away at age 55, following 3 years of partial paralysis caused by a stroke. The union of William K. Vanderbilt crumbled amid the strains of relentless social ascent. In time, Charles Schwab admitted that his sprawling residence delivered no fulfillment, admitting he would have been satisfied with a more modest dwelling requiring less upkeep. These estates functioned as duties rather than delights. They demanded endless oversight and limitless funds. Erected to demonstrate superiority, they swiftly morphed into liabilities once that point was made. George Vanderbilt grasped this dynamic more acutely than most. For years at Biltmore, he labored to render the property self-sustaining via innovative forestry and farming techniques. The woodlands eventually yielded slight returns, but the manor itself proved unprofitable. It devoured cash at a pace outstripping his portfolio's growth. Upon George's death in 1914, due to issues stemming from an appendectomy, his spouse Edith confronted the identical untenable equation that awaited all such estate holders. The residence gleamed with splendor, yet it also represented an unrelenting monetary sinkhole. This cycle became the norm. Erect with splendor, validate your stature, then realize that sustaining it devours your whole legacy. The snare lay hidden as long as the wealth endured. It turned unavoidable once the coffers waned. Assembling these citadels involved orchestration on par with wartime operations. When Cornelius Vanderbilt II resolved to reconstruct the breakers after flames razed the initial wooden cottage in 1892, he imposed a ruthless timeline on Richard Morris Hunt. Craft an Italian Renaissance palace, ensure total resistance to fire, completed in readiness for the 1895 summer social whirl. Just 2 years for what demanded at least 5. Hunt succeeded, but solely through deploying assets at a scale without precedent. Groundbreaking for the foundations commenced in the spring of 1893. Laborers delved profoundly into Newport's rugged cliffs, forging a platform sturdy enough for hundreds of tons of limestone and iron. The digging phase alone spanned months. The underlying rock proved irregular, necessitating explosives in spots. Each yard of extracted material required carting off via horse-drawn carts. The location evolved into a makeshift town, with crews bunking in provisional shelters close by. Documents indicate that during the height of activity, more than 2,000 workers toiled on site in staggered crews operating non-stop. Supplies arrived from distant shores. Exterior limestone blocks were hewn from Indiana quarries, shaped into enormous slabs and transported by train to Newport. Stonemasons from Italy crossed the Atlantic to sculpt the intricate ornamentation. Interior marble for flooring and pillars hailed from quarries in Italy and Africa. With every slab chosen for hue and excellence. Bronze hardware was molded in France. Chandeliers crystal originated from Baccarat. Exotic timbers for wainscoting were harvested from woodlands spanning various continents. Overseeing the influx of these goods while adhering to deadlines fell to dedicated overseers laboring without respite. The mandate for fire resistance dictated all choices in engineering. The prior breakers, a timber-framed Queen Anne bungalow, had ignited and vanished in mere hours. The replacement featured no wooden structural elements whatsoever. Its framework consisted of steel, a bold innovation for homes then. Enclosing walls were of brick, clad in limestone. Roof supports employed steel beams over wood. Heating boilers resided in a subterranean vault under the front yard, linked to the residence by passageway. An explosion there would spare the primary building. Hunt had vanquished the blaze hazard by purging all flammable components. The music room exemplified the lengths these clans would go to. Cornelius envisioned a space suited for orchestral performances and solo renditions. Hunt conceived the layout, yet the fabrication occurred in France. The workshop of Allard Edfels assembled the full chamber in their Paris facility, meticulously shaping each panel and trim to precise measures. Once finished, the components were carefully taken apart, section by section. Every component received a label and was crated up for the voyage across the ocean. Artisans from France journeyed to Newport afterward, putting it all back together within the metal skeleton that Hunt had constructed. Contrary to popular belief, the walls weren't gilded with gold. Instead, they were finished in platinum, a choice Alice Vanderbilt made for its more understated luster. The price tag, just for the platinum, was breathtaking. This approach of fabricating overseas and transporting to the U.S. turned into a common method. At William K. Vanderbilt's Marble House, for instance, a full Gothic chamber was crafted in France before being relocated to Newport. The elms constructed for coal baron Edward Berwind included furnishings made in Paris by Allard at Fils and sent over the sea. Rosecliffe's Grand Ballroom drew inspiration from Versailles and was realized by French artisans right there on American ground. These wealthy clans doubted that local craftspeople could match the sophistication of Europe, so they brought in the experts together with the raw materials. The Schwab residence in New York brought its own set of transport hurdles. Located on Riverside Drive, it spanned a whole urban block. Digging the base meant cutting through Manhattan's solid rock without destabilizing nearby roads. The metal skeleton climbed floor by floor during 1904 and 1905. Outside, it combined granite and limestone. Inside, it boasted cutting-edge features that tested the limits of home engineering. One highlight was the swimming pool, among the earliest in any private New York City dwelling. The gym came equipped with the newest workout gear. Down in the cellar, a dedicated power station produced electricity for the whole place, separate from the municipal network. Schwab could entertain vast crowds of visitors while relying solely on the home's own energy. This focus on mechanical setups captured the period's faith in progress. The breakers offered both gas and electric illumination, complete with toggles to switch if one went out. Each bathroom included 4 taps supplying hot and cold tap water, along with hot and cold salt water, drawn from the ocean and warmed in tanks on the roof. For central heat, massive coal-burning furnaces ran non-stop through the cold season, devouring fuel. Air circulation relied on blowers driven by steam or power. Such setups were triumphs of ingenuity, yet they demanded expert care to keep running. Each upgrade brought extra layers of intricacy and outlay. Build times differed wildly based on the scale of vision. Marble House wrapped up in 4 years, from 1888 to 1892. The breakers went up in about 2.5 years, thanks to Hunt's aggressive timeline. Biltmore demanded 6 years, 1889 to 1895, and George Vanderbilt kept expanding the estate and annexes for years beyond that. The Clark Place on Fifth Avenue took 3 years. Modest estates might wrap in 18 months to 2 years. Grand endeavors often dragged on forever as proprietors kept requesting tweaks and expansions. Those erecting these estates mirrored the diverse workers of the time. Expert Europeans earned top pay and some dignity. Stonecutters from Italy, carvers from France, and smiths from Germany delivered skills beyond what U.S. hands knew. Supporting them were ranks of unskilled toilers, often fresh arrivals from abroad, pulling in basic pay for grueling tasks. The job sites brimmed with peril. Tumbles happened often. Machinery breakdowns led to hurts. Safety rules were non-existent by today's standards. These grand homes ascended thanks to laborers whose identities faded from the records once done. Budget breakdowns for such ventures showed what mattered most to the patrons. Building expenses were merely the start. The breakers ran about $7 million for the structure, but outfitting and adornments piled on millions extra. Marble House's $11 million tab covered building and insides. Yet Alva Vanderbilt poured more riches into the gardens and the Chinese tea house. Biltmore's $5 million build was overshadowed by the cost of taming 125,000 acres and stocking 250 chambers with pieces and paintings. The residences stood as empty frames. Filling them often doubled or tripled the total spend. Once the builders packed up and the designers left, the clans settled in to see their handiwork. The spaces dazzled, the workmanship astounded. The gadgets offered peak luxury and ease. Yet the estates also showed their burdens right away. Heat needed endless stoking. Staff hordes wanted oversight. Landscapes craved upkeep. Fine objects required polishing and safeguarding. These estates weren't mere assets. They were duties that kicked in as the final crew departed and persisted relentlessly until the structures fell or were handed off. Those who financed these grand edifices were well versed in the art of building. They had erected vast networks of railways, massive steel factories, and sprawling oil processing facilities. They possessed a keen sense for producing on a grand scale. Yet they failed to appreciate the stark contrast between constructing a project once and sustaining it indefinitely. Rail lines produce income to fund their ongoing care. Palaces like these yield no returns. Instead, they devour resources relentlessly, season after season, extracting endless payments from the very riches that brought them into existence. With the building phase complete, the true expenses were only getting underway. Step inside the entrance of the breakers, and your eyes immediately fix on the soaring Great Hall, climbing almost 50 feet to a ceiling painted to mimic the vast expanse of an Italian sky. Towering pillars flank the sides, topped with ornate gold-leafed capitals. The ground gleams with buffed marble, arranged in intricate geometric designs. A sweeping stairway ascends to the upper-level balcony, its railings hewn from exotic stone. This area was crafted to stun guests right from the start, before they glimpsed the rest. And it did so, masterfully. The immense proportions of these entryways served as calculated displays of dominance. a form of mental conquest. At the Clark Mansion, the foyer stretched across 3 levels, bathed in daylight from an overhead glass dome. The Schwab residence boasted a vestibule clad in marble with opulent bronze accents that outpriced whole homes in typical districts. The Fick home led into an open-air inner courtyard, where a fountain and lush greenery shone through transparent panels. Every household aimed to convey instantly to callers that they had crossed into an alternate realm, unbound by everyday limitations. The music room at the Breakers showcased the heights attainable with boundless funds. Its panels gleamed with platinum instead of gold, a choice Alice Vanderbilt made for its more refined hue. The overhead vault was intricately sculpted and adorned with gold. Hanging lights of baccarat crystal dangled heavily, each one tipping the scales at hundreds of pounds. This chamber could host more than 100 people for musical evenings and performances. In the height of Newport's summer gatherings, top American artists played for crowds clad in garments worth thousands. The entire space, assembled in France and transported overseas, justified every mile of the voyage. Banquet halls in such estates could host scores for elaborate dinners stretching over hours. The Breakers' dining area soared 2 floors, encircled by a dozen Algerian marble pillars crowned in gilded bronze. Its paneled roof bore artistic frescoes. Twin massive baccarat pendants hovered over the board, packed with thousands of sparkling prisms. At one side, a hearth vast enough for a person to step into was sculpted from varied marbles in bold hues. Up to 34 could eat together here, as staff slipped through concealed passages embedded in the walls. The sculleries fueling these feasts operated like full-scale factories. The Breakers' kitchen housed several stoves, zones for prepping various dishes, chillers needing constant ice restocks, and pantries stocked with enormous supplies. A tiered staff of culinary experts served under a head cook, earning more than many white-collar workers. Meals ascended via utility shafts and elevators to reach the table, steaming and impeccably arranged. Diners remained oblivious to the elaborate setup powering the spectacle. Personal suites highlighted shifting focuses. Alice Vanderbilt's sleeping chamber at the Breakers formed an elliptical space crafted by Ogden Codman, complete with 4 wardrobes to store the 7 wardrobe switches she underwent daily amid the party circuit. Her daytime ensemble varied from her midday frock, which varied from her nightdress, which varied from her supper finery. Every switch called for distinct trinkets and gems. The cupboards brimmed with scores of ensembles and countless coordinated pieces. A call button beside her bed could alert attendants from any corner of the estate. Lavatories in these properties introduced cutting-edge features that took years to go mainstream. The Breakers' washrooms offered 4 taps, heated and chilled drinking water, alongside warmed and cooled ocean water, drawn from the sea and held in upper-level reservoirs. Seawater soaks were prized for health benefits. Hardware was shaped from marble or molded in bronze. Alice's tub was hewn from one solid marble slab over a ton in weight. Hauling it indoors and upstairs demanded clever structural feats. The piping system itself exceeded what average households budgeted for their full dwellings. The study areas in these dwellings held thousands of tomes, frequently bought in bulk by linear foot instead of individual works. George Vanderbilt at Biltmore stood as a true book lover, fluent in several tongues, who gathered more than 23,000 volumes he planned to delve into personally. The Breakers' book room was lined with Circassian walnut, etched with gold foil to evoke rows of leather volumes. Its hearth surround originated from a 16th-century French castle. Etched overhead was a French motto: "I laugh at great wealth and never miss it. In the end, only wisdom truly counts." Yet the twist of that sentiment gracing a $7 million extravaganza seemed lost on all who brought it to life. The artworks adorning these walls embodied lavish expenditures at European auction halls. Today, the Frick collection stands as a public museum showcasing Henry Clay Frick's treasures, pieces by Vermeer, Rembrandt, El Greco, Turner, and scores of other renowned artists. The Vanderbilts approached collecting in their own way, prioritizing ornate decorative objects and furniture rather than canvases. The Astors gathered tapestries and statues instead. Each clan's holdings mirrored their unique vision of culture and the proper way to flaunt riches. These pieces weren't merely attractive, they served as proof of refinement that mere cash couldn't buy. The expansive estates around these grand homes extended their bold designs into the landscape. The breakers occupied 13 acres, complete with manicured gardens, fountains, and walkways that reached the cliffside overlooking the Atlantic's pounding waves. Marble House boasted intricate gardens, including the Chinese tea house where Alva Vanderbilt held her suffrage gatherings following her second marriage. Biltmore's landscapes, crafted by Frederick Law Olmsted, sprawled across 125,000 acres of cultivated woods, floral displays, and farmland. The sheer magnitude was breathtaking. Upkeep for such properties demanded hordes of gardeners toiling non-stop throughout the year. Staff living quarters took up whole levels, tucked away from the families and visitors' sightlines. At the breakers, 33 servants resided in fourth-floor chambers beneath the mansard roof, decent by the era's norms with beds, dressers, and views, yet isolated from the opulence downstairs. Secret passages let women staff navigate the residence unseen. This setup let the owners imagine their luxuries, materialized effortlessly, even as scores of laborers toiled out of view to sustain the facade. The gatherings in these halls shaped the Gilded Age's elite social rhythm. Alva Vanderbilt's 1883 costume ball achieved mythic status, with attendees dropping thousands on costumes. Mrs. Astor's yearly affair set the tone for the season's hierarchy. Newport's summer soirees matched the splendor of old-world nobility. Full orchestras performed, gourmet feasts were laid out, and fireworks illuminated the night. Revelers pulled up in horse-drawn carriages, then later in cars draped in gems rivaling the value of entire factories. These palaces were crafted precisely for such spectacles, serving as grand theaters for flaunting fortune. The contradictions woven into these edifices eluded their builders. They erected spaces to showcase refinement, all while importing art in bulk. They stocked libraries with volumes gathering dust. They etched mottos on wisdom into surfaces that glorified nothing but indulgence. These homes declared enduring legacy from lineages whose empires were already starting to crumble. Each ornate chamber doubled as an ongoing expense. Every gold-leafed ceiling demanded regular repairs. Every polished marble surface called for expert care. The splendor carried an endless bill that kept mounting. These clans had erected tributes to their dominance. They'd also raised testaments to how supremacy inevitably slips away. The breakers alone incurred $83,000 in yearly property taxes. The family occupied it for just 8 weeks a year. That figure alone exposes the core weakness in every Gilded Age estate. Such structures aim to broadcast affluence, not functionality or thrift. The grander the waste, the stronger the message, though that waste came with unrelenting annual costs. From the outset, Newport's rhythm followed the seasons. The summer retreat thrived from early June to late August, roughly 12 weeks tops. Plenty of families lingered for even briefer spells, showing up in July and vanishing before Labor Day. The Vanderbilts generally claimed the breakers for 8 weeks, or fewer if duties pulled them to New York. In that short window, the estate buzzed with full-scale activity. Scores of staff operated non-stop. Kitchens churned out sumptuous dishes. Landscapes were groomed flawlessly. Soirees, overflowed the music room. Then came September, and the exodus began. The properties never fully shut down in winter. Year-round caretakers stayed on, haunting the cavernous, deserted halls and inspecting the multitude of vacant spaces now and then. Their role focused on averting catastrophe, not upholding extravagance. They scanned for water damage or shattered panes. They kept the heat just high enough to avoid frozen pipes. They spotted decay and flagged issues needing fixes. For 44 weeks annually, the residences lay idle, icons biding time for their fleeting summer revival. Even the heating setups guzzled immense resources. The breakers' furnaces devoured more than 150 tons of coal each year. Much of it fired up during those empty months when no one was around. Coal deliveries, storage, and loading into the furnaces demanded ongoing attention from workers. The personnel handling these operations drew full-year paychecks. The intricate machinery often broke down, leading to hefty repair bills. All estates of this magnitude grappled with comparable challenges. The heating plants ran continuously, as did the mounting expenses. Personnel needs grew alongside the grandeur of the designs. In 1890, an affluent but unpretentious home might rely on just 5 or 6 household aides. Yet a Gilded Age palace called for over 50 during peak times. The breakers demanded 58 employees to function smoothly while the family stayed there. Chefs, chambermaids, valets, stewards, horticulturists, drivers, laundresses, and niche specialists each filled distinct positions in a rigid chain of command. In quieter months, the bulk were let go, though a skeleton crew stayed on the payroll to oversee upkeep. The wage ledger never fully halted. The estate's landscapes required care, irrespective of visitors. Ornate gardens called for skilled landscapers, active through the bloom period. Turf had to be cut regularly. Bushes shaped, branches clipped from shrubs. Pathways and entrances kept in good repair. Come winter, drifts were shoveled away, and storm wreckage fixed. A 13-acre spread like the breakers supported a steady team of groundskeepers whose paychecks piled up fast. Vast holdings such as Biltmore's 125,000 acres necessitated whole teams for woodland management and farming tasks. The mindset justifying such extravagance was overt and without remorse. Elite clans took no shame in upholding residences they seldom occupied. That very idleness was the essence. Ordinary folks could purchase practical homes for daily life. True elites alone could sustain grand chateaus vacant for most months. Such excess signaled abundance. It underscored how their wealth allowed shelling out hundreds of thousands yearly on sites used only for fleeting summer stays. The less sensible, the more striking. This approach thrived while assets stayed vast and secure. In 1885, Cornelius Vanderbilt II came into about $70 million. Even modest yields on investments produced millions yearly without eroding the core sum. Dropping $500, 000 annually across several estates still covered all else with ease. The figures appeared unassailable. The wealth felt boundless. Expenses, no matter their size, seemed unable to drain it dry. Yet, wealth concentrations inevitably scatter over time. Vanderbilt riches crested at William Henry's $200 million legacy in 1885. He split it among his offspring. Cornelius II got the biggest portion, though his siblings claimed hefty portions as well. Upon each one's passing, those sums fragmented anew among the next heirs. With every passing lineage, the pot shrank more. Each also indulged more boldly than predecessors, erecting grander abodes and embracing flashier habits. The line between a self-sustaining fortune and a mere bequest grew vital. A fortune yields returns surpassing outlays, letting one splurge yet amass more wealth annually. An inheritance, by contrast, is a static pool that shrinks with every withdrawal. It supports comfort briefly, but the funds dwindle to nothing. The tycoons who raised these Gilded Age showplaces commanded fortunes. Their grandchildren merely took what lingered post-splits and expenditures. The shift stayed hidden initially, but proved deadly in the end. Property levies intensified decade by decade. These homes arose in an era of trivial real estate duties. By the 1920s, municipalities realized the windfall from levying these opulent sites. The breakers alone carried an $83,000 yearly tax tab, worth more than $1 million in today's terms. That hit just one holding. Clans with spreads in various spots confronted aggregate duties that devoured huge chunks of their waning earnings. The financial framework enabling these estates started crumbling undetected. The National Income Levy debuted in 1913, starting small but climbing relentlessly. By the 1920s, peak brackets topped 70%. The once endless returns from assets now faced heavy bites. Households that never fretted over earnings suddenly tracked them precisely. Each dollar, funneled into estate care, had already endured stiff taxation. At the same time, the domestic labor market shifted. Employees, once content with slim pay for the honor of great house service, pushed for fairer wages. Labor groups rallied household staff in certain urban areas. Entry curbs slashed the flow of inexpensive overseas hands. The 50 aides staffing a palace in 1895 might total $30,000 in wages for the year. By 1925, an equivalent crew ran 3 times that figure. Outgoings surged as revenues dropped. Nobody anticipated that constructing these grand estates would lead their descendants into poverty. The Vanderbilts, Astors, and Whitneys appeared to possess riches that could never be depleted. Their wealth was counted in tens of millions, while the average American scraped by on mere hundreds each year. The disparity between their opulence and the rest of societies was beyond understanding. What mechanism could possibly drain the coffers of such affluent dynasties? The explanation lay in the very foundations of their excess. These families had erected symbols of grandeur that demanded fortunes of equal magnitude to sustain. A palace, valued at $7 million, required a backing estate worth $70 million. As inheritances fragmented under division and taxes eroded them further, even as upkeep soared due to inflation and escalating labor costs, the financial equation inevitably broke down. The once proud homes turned into burdensome snares, devouring resources year after year as the funds to support them dwindled. In essence, these clans had forged their own gilded cages, adorning them with exquisite splendor. The downfall predated the Wall Street crash. The introduction of the federal income tax in 1913 began on a modest scale. Yet it escalated relentlessly over the ensuing years. By 1918, the highest marginal rate had climbed to 77% for earnings exceeding $1 million. What had once felt like boundless wealth now faced heavy yearly erosions. Lineages unaccustomed to separating earnings from principal suddenly realized they were outpacing their income with expenditures. The Great War hastened a profound shift in society. Heirs primed for inheriting lavish residences were dispatched to the battlefields of France. Domestic staff who once tended to palatial homes departed for higher paying. Conflict. It grew increasingly hard to conflict. It grew increasingly hard to rationalize preserving a 70-room seaside retreat when troops perished in the mud of the trenches, a sentiment that even permeated elite circles. The Roaring Twenties offered a deceptive rebound. Stock values rocketed, inflating virtual wealth exponentially. Certain families capitalized on the surge to offload estates they could no longer afford to uphold. In 1926, Alice Vanderbilt parted with the sprawling Fifth Avenue residence, overwhelmed by the challenge of overseeing both Edai and the breakers. The purchasers razed it promptly, erecting an apartment complex in its place. Others clung tightly, convinced the affluence was here to stay. They misjudged severely. The illusion shattered irrevocably in October 1929. From 1929 to 1932, the market plummeted by almost 90%. Portfolios that once yielded tens of thousands in yearly dividends went barren overnight. Households accustomed to living off earnings now eroded their core assets just to get by. What had appeared viable financially turned ruinous in mere months. The Great Depression obliterated the remnants of Gilded Age hierarchies. Displays of affluence morphed from enviable to perilous. Clans who had raised these behemoths to flaunt their preeminence now drew the ire of an unforgiving public. The labor movements of the 1930s zeroed in on emblems of extravagance. Sustaining a regal abode while multitudes went hungry invited both political backlash and personal peril. Numerous families simply boarded up their properties to evade scrutiny as lightning rods for discontent. Fiscal pressures mounted unabated. In 1936, the peak marginal tax rate hit 79%. Inheritance levies neared 70% on the grandest estates. Generations that had envisioned bequeathing these treasures intact found that death duties would devour the bulk of surviving assets. The very edifices meant to cement lasting legacies now blocked the transfer of meaningful wealth to successors. Cornelius Vanderbilt III observed his kin's empire crumble. Decades prior, his father had cut him out of the will for wedding against approval, granting him far less than his brothers and sisters. Yet even they grappled to preserve their shares. Alfred perished aboard the Lusitania in 1915. Reginald succumbed to alcoholism in 1925. Gertrude secured her own independence via matrimony and her pursuits in painting. Only Gladys was positioned to take on the breakers, yet she lacked the resources to sustain it. Charles Schwab's saga served as a stark warning for the times. He had commissioned New York's most magnificent private residence, a 75-room behemoth spanning a full city block. Known for extravagant hosting and leaving his doors unlocked, his ventures tanked alongside the steel sector. By the 1930s, personal ruin had set in. He resided in modest quarters as his vacant palace lingered, unsold and unwanted. He passed away in 1939, indebted to lenders. His spouse battled for years to unload the property. Offers fell short of even covering yearly levies. It mouldered unoccupied until 1948 when demolition finally claimed it. The surviving spouses shouldered the gravest loads. Husbands departed this world, stranding their partners with unmanageable and unsellable holdings. Alice Vanderbilt contended with the breakers for 35 years following Cornelius's death. In her final 9 years, clad in mourning black for her late son Reginald, she witnessed the family wealth dissolve before her eyes. She shuttled between Newport and New York on an alternating schedule, unable to pay for servants at both residences at once. Upon her death in 1934, her holdings amounted to barely more than $10 million, compared to the $200 million amassed by her father-in-law. Over 3 generations, 95% of the wealth had vanished. The teardowns picked up speed in the 1930s and 1940s. Those clans that held out against sales in the 1920s finally relented amid the economic downturn. Estates without takers fetched only scrap prices. Wrecking firms competed for contracts to dismantle grand homes and hawk the remnants. A marble mantle might fetch a couple $1,000s. Bronze hardware got melted down for meager metal rates. Intricate paneling was yanked out and peddled piece by piece. Structures that had demanded millions to erect proved more valuable in ruins than intact. Bellevue Avenue in Newport turned into a ragged, gap-toothed line. Lavish dwellings once occupied by America's elite families loomed vacant, panes shattered, Some vanished completely, their sites reverting to mere lawns. The elite seaside retreat that had epitomized U.S. high society was crumbling in plain sight. Lineages that had vacationed there for decades just ceased showing up. Soirees wound down, ensembles quieted. The stiff customs of engraved cards and engraved invites faded into forgotten customs. Every estate holder grappled with a stark, crushing dilemma. How do you handle an asset whose upkeep outstrips your budget, yet defies sale at any cost? No choice felt right. These estates had no choice but to be sold off to the highest bidder. No choice felt right. These estates had morphed into dead-end burdens. Certain families devised ingenious workarounds to stave off doom. They let out bedrooms. They hosted paid garden galas for causes. They auctioned paintings and pieces to scrape together funds for one more season's care. They shuttered sections and warmed just the spaces in use. Every concession chipped away at the grandeur, even as it bought a bit more time. Edifices erected to flaunt boundless riches now screamed their scarcity. By 1945, Fifth Avenue's upheaval was mostly done. The Astors, the Vanderbilts, the Whitneys, and the bulk of those storied dynasties had yielded their New York strongholds. The boulevard, once dubbed Millionaire's Row, was morphing into a business strip. High-rises for residences and offices sprouted amid the ghosts of chateaus. The dense cluster of personal fortunes that had shaped the district for 6 decades scattered to the winds. Newport fared somewhat better than Manhattan, thanks to more modest sizes and lingering allure of the spot. Yet endurance wasn't the same as thriving. The holdouts clung to their _0_ via grit and cutbacks. They trimmed help to bare essentials. They postponed fixes until crises demanded them. They eyed adjacent lots, succumbed to hammers, and pondered their own fate. The lavish age had passed. All that lingered was picking over the bones. The Breakers endures on its seaside perch facing the ocean. Each year, over 400,000 sightseers stream in, forking over entry fees to roam chambers once reserved for select company. The estate that had strained 3 Vanderbilt lines to breaking now pulls in funds to sustain itself and bolster wider conservation work. Its rescue hinged on a straightforward yet ironic fix: handing it over. Countess Gladys Vanderbilt Sechenyi took possession of the Breakers after her mother Alice's passing in 1934. At 47, wed to a Hungarian aristocrat, she found herself utterly unequipped to shoulder the load. Property levies ran $83,000 a year by themselves. Coverage, repairs, and skeleton crews piled on tens of thousands extra. Gladys lacked any earnings to cover it. The vast riches behind this bastion had splintered across airs and withered under years of strain. For 14 years she battled the unforgiving numbers. She ran curtailed summer openings with skeleton crews. She sealed off levels to slash fuel bills. She let decay creep in, a sight that would have appalled her grandfather. Between 1939 and 1942, she abandoned it outright, bunking at Sister Gertrude's Newport place while the Breakers moldered, unoccupied. Wartime brought a brief role as a blackout haven. That faded with victory. In 1948, the Preservation Society of Newport County stepped in with a proposal: a $1 a year lease, turn it into a public exhibit. They'd cover all fixes, expenses, and guided walks. Gladys kept title and a secluded suite on the upper level. The house lived on without bankrupting her. She agreed. That summer, for the first time, ticket-holding guests strolled through the grand hall. The irony struck right away, deep and striking. The grand residence, erected to showcase Vanderbilt dominance, endured by embracing openness. With just a ticket, anyone could now explore chambers previously off-limits to all but the upper crust. The very seclusion that drove the construction effort flipped on its head. The house gained renown precisely because entry was available to all rather than barred to most. Its growing accessibility ensured even greater protection. Biltmore Estate charted a similar route to preservation. After George Vanderbilt's passing in 1914, his widow Edith faced challenges with the estate. Yet prudent oversight kept it afloat. Their daughter Cornelia later handed it over to her sons. In 1930, the family welcomed paying crowds, turning it into one of the nation's earliest large-scale home museums. They held on to ownership while overhauling the financial approach. These days, more than 1 million people wander Biltmore each year. The property George failed to sustain as a secluded retreat now flourishes through public commerce. This trend echoed in other enduring estates. The Elms welcomed visitors in 1962, Marble House in 1963, and Rosecliff in 1971. Every site that lasted did so by shedding its private status. The original owners lacked the means to sustain them, but the throngs of tourists provide the needed support. Certain mansions secured their future through organizations instead of tourism. The Frick Collection debuted as a public gallery in 1935, 2 years following the death of Henry Clay Frick's widow. It evolved into a space where patrons could view the artwork alongside the home's original surroundings that once displayed it. Some buildings, repurposed into educational institutions, medical facilities, or official offices. Those unable to draw crowds or partners met the bulldozer or neglect. Today, the Preservation Society oversees 11 landmarks, among them, the Breakers. Ticket sales from that one property alone finance upkeep for the whole collection. The $7 million edifice that nearly devoured the Vanderbilt wealth now bolsters a broad legacy of architecture. Figures that signaled ruin back then now signal endurance. The data lays out the tale of survival plainly. Newport's seasonal enclave once boasted over 80 grand cottages. About half fell to demolition from 1920 to 1970. The rest that endured now invite the public. Sites kept fully private, survived only with rare funding sources or revenue from adaptive reuse. Lavish personal opulence on a Gilded Age level turned out nearly impossible to uphold anywhere. Fifth Avenue's row of mansions vanished almost completely. The Frick endures as a museum. A handful adapted to public roles. The rest gave way to new developments. High-rises and businesses now shelter thousands in spaces where only scores resided before. The area's hallmark of concentrated riches bowed to urban bustle. These insights unsettle those who erect tributes to their own stature. The Vanderbilts poured $7 million into asserting their preeminence. Yet within 4 decades, upkeep eluded them. The Astors, Whitneys, and Schwabs met the same end. Vast fortunes appeared endless, but faded. Seeming indestructible homes revealed their fragility. Only those relinquished by creators outlasted time. Generosity preserves what selfishness erodes. Such is the stark verdict from 100 years of these estates' stories. Clans that grip tightly to sole possession witness their legacy crumble under demolition. Those who welcomed the world inside watched their abodes endure for ages. The elitism that sparked the building boom turned into the chief barrier to continuity. The openness the architects scorned emerged as the saving force. The Breakers endures precisely as Cornelius Vanderbilt envisioned it 130 years back. Ocean waves pound the cliffs beneath. Its stone exterior shines brightly. The vast hall rises toward its ceiling fresco. Those shimmering walls catch the glow that lit elite gatherings long ago. The tangible elements remain intact, yet the significance has shifted utterly. This fortress of one clan's superiority now demonstrates a different truth. It shows that legacies outlast their makers solely when they broaden past solitary splendor. It reveals that splendor lasts through shared enjoyment. It underscores that the era's finest creations endured only by forsaking the mindset that birthed them. The Vanderbilts lavished riches to claim their spot in America's nobility. Their heirs labored for decades to safeguard those riches' creations. Preservation demanded sharing the inheritance with all. Newport's poshest spot evolved into its busiest draw. The retreat, meant for a select circle, now serves the masses. That was far from Cornelius Vanderbilt's plan when he hired Richard Morris Hunt in 1893. But it proved the sole path allowing his dream to persist. This lingering query haunts both the intact estates and the lost remnants alike. What significance lies in the fact that $7 million failed to secure eternity? What insight into fortune and endurance emerges from the inability of America's wealthiest clans to sustain their grand creations? The elite of the Gilded Age unearthed a stark reality, one that their enduring structures now impart to all who wander through. It's possible to erect timeless wonders from platinum, marble, and gold, yet true permanence eludes even the mightiest riches. Once the funds dwindle, the sole path to redemption is total release.